Yeah, this is real. For those of you wondering from the distant future, this is real. This is a real thing that exists. Um, I spent most of today fantasizing about kicking this off with I'm too tired for this today. I've been very tired today. I should work on that. I need to work on that. That's probably an indication that the caffeine relationship is once again in a not good place. Uh, and I know that I need to do something about that before April when new baby gets here, because when new baby gets here, I'm going to need to be a Minuteman. I'm going to need to jump and run. Can't do that when your life is heavily regulated through caffeine. You need to have a zero tolerance caffeine relationship if you're going to be prepared to jump and sprint and dive at any time around the clock. So that's something to work on. Something to work on. Didn't have too many thoughts today. Nah, that's a lie. That's a lie. There are definitely some things to discuss. I'm just not sure that I'm ready to jump in unprepared. But that's what this medium is about. This is meant to be a journaling tool. This is meant to be a place where ideas are dissected, or at least made mention of before they disappear into the ether. So here goes. Let's test this out, see whether or not this medium is capable of this kind of thing. I like to be able to have a little bit more control over the shape of my thoughts and in what order they're presented. I like to be a little bit more responsible about the direction that they take. And so I do my best not to start a thought until I at least know that I have a relatively straightforward concept of how to land the idea. In this case, I don't have that. So this would be, bringing this into a discussion would be a true test of the medium's capability as a journaling tool. So here goes. I was raised independent fundamental Baptist. So what does that mean? Independent means it means that the church is its own local authority tied only to the direction of the religious text, the Bible, and that it's subject to no other governing body. Therefore, there's no need to reconcile the authority of two different sources, the Bible and some parent body. So independent, fundamental, meaning that the text of the Bible is the meaning of the Bible. There is not some additional understanding necessary through other people's writings or other people's supplementary texts. Fundamental means the Bible means what it says and says what it means in all respects, and that the only tool necessary to understand the Bible is the Bible. So independent, fundamental, and then Baptist is the belief that that the relationship with God is a voluntary one and begins with surrender, begins with respecting one's own fallibility, respecting one's own failed condition as a sinful creature, and then voluntarily coming to God as the completer and the finisher. And then you get into doctrine about professing faith. I'm a sinner. I believe in God. Christ died for me. You become saved through the action of faith. Holy Spirit is the divinity of God that has some sort of union and partnership with your immortal soul, and you become more attached to God. And then, from that point forward, instead of spending immortality in hell, you spend immortality in heaven. So that is the independent fundamental Baptist. There's a lot of doctrine in those three things. Anyway, that's how I was raised. It's a voluntary thing. It's an all-in, all-out thing. It's faith-based, and you become fully subject to both God and the Bible, which is meant to be equal to God. I think it's in some verses, the Bible says he's lifted his word above his name. In another verse, I think it's the beginning of John, he says, in the beginning was the Word, and the Word was with God, and the Word was God. So, the infallibility of the Bible as scripture, as holy text, is paramount, and the idea that you don't need any additional understanding or supplementary text or supplementary exposition to understand it, no matter who you are or what direction you're coming from, or what interpretation you have. So that's independent fundamental Baptist. That's how I grew up. Another thing to mention about that was that I grew up in a church called First Baptist of Hammond. When I was little, my preacher's name was Jack Hiles. Jack Hiles was a very consequential man in independent fundamental Baptist movements. He took the church from a size of maybe some 100 or hundreds to tens of thousands on a weekly basis, and tens of thousands. That doesn't sound right. I'm pretty sure that a morning service was like 5,000 at the peak of Jack Hiles' ministry, and maybe more, maybe like 7 at the peak of the overall size of the church. But I seem to remember there being tens of thousands when it comes to Sunday school. Anyway, it was a very large church just outside of Chicago in Hammond, Indiana. My family was there at a consequential time. My dad's family came from Southern Illinois. That was a coal mining town, Carrier Mills. My grandfather and grandmother raised 10 children, 8 boys and 2 girls in Carrier Mills, Indiana. My dad was the 7th son, and he was born in 1936. And many of the older brothers were in World War II. They were being raised in the Depression. There was a little bit of farmland on the property, not much. They had some fruit trees, they had some potatoes, some corn. My grandfather raised some pigs that they fed with scraps. That was this sort of like improvised recycling system that my grandfather had for the town, where he would put a garbage can next to the garbage can of other people in town where they could throw their food scraps, and that's how he fed the pigs. So just on other people's garbage. He was known in the town by the nickname Christ Crazy, and that was sort of a derogatory term, but my dad always took that to be very evidence of what a good man he was and how devoted he was to the idea of serving God. So Dad always took it very seriously when he would call himself the 7th son of Christ Crazy. And he also took it seriously that his dad named him Samuel, even though that was a name that my dad wouldn't keep. He became Don Wayne Lale when he joined the Army, because he was called Donnie Wayne for most of his life by all of his friends and family and schoolmates, and it just felt awkward for him to join the Army under the name Samuel, so he had it changed when he joined the Army. I believe that probably the reason that he called himself Don Wayne was because of John Wayne. My dad was an immense John Wayne fan, and probably something about the way that he pronounced things as a little kid. The women in the family would tease him about being Don Wayne, and that seems to fit with all the other stories that I've heard. It also seems to fit with the fact that the closest in age to him was the last son, my Uncle Chuck, the youngest. He, as being the youngest, the baby, he called himself Butch, and my dad called himself John Wayne, but he, was young enough that it sounded like Don Wayne. So that's the origin of my name, Don Wayne Lale Jr. So technically, you might also say that I could be Samuel Jr., Samuel Lale Jr. Anyway, all that to say, the coal work in Southern Illinois dried up. My Uncle Bob, the oldest of the brothers, got the chance to work in the coal mines for a while, just like his dad did. That wasn't all his dad, my grandfather did. My grandfather was also a lawyer, did a lot of other things over the course of his lifetime. But he did work in the coal mine, and my oldest uncle, Uncle Bob, worked in the coal mine. That was not to remain for Carrier Mills. Many of the brothers, many of my uncles moved up to work in ironwork near Chicago. So some of them came up to help build bridges and buildings, steel and iron in the city. And when they did that, when many of them started moving up after the war to Northwest Indiana around Chicago, my grandmother, Opal Whale, went with and ensured that all of the boys found their way into a church. And I know that that's the case because I have a letter from the pastor at the time. His name was Owen Miller, I think, thanking my grandmother for coming on Mother's Day and bringing all of her sons. So it was, my grandmother made sure that everybody in the family stuck together, and she made sure they were all in church. So they all joined this church in Hammond, Indiana. And Pastor Owen Miller didn't last much longer after that. He was replaced by a man named Jack Hiles. Jack Hiles made the decision to change the direction of this upper middle class church, where there were, millionaires in the church who he said gave $50,000 a week in offerings. The mayor was a member of the church. Big business owners in town, the largest business owners in the town, were members of this church. And he made a choice early on in the church that he was not going to bow to the pressure that these men presented when opposing his plan to bring in the many poor in Chicago. So Jack Hiles was a man who had traveled to Chicago to preach before. He had seen some things in Chicago that depressed him and made him cry. He prayed from his home church in Texas that somebody would go to Chicago and reach all of these poor people. Turned out it was going to be him. Through moves in his career, he made his way up to Hammond, Indiana, near Chicago, and he said the first thing he was going to do is he was going to grab up whatever buses he could and start running buses to downtown Chicago and getting the kids on Sunday morning to have an opportunity to come down and participate in church. So the wealthy upper middle class or upper class men or families in the local church in Hammond, Indiana, did not like all of these poor, in many cases, single parent black kids coming out of Chicago by the busload into the church, and they said, it's us or them. And he said, okay, I picked the bus kids. He lost his wealthy donors. The church transformed. It went through a fundamental transformation and became one of the largest Sunday schools, if not the largest Sunday school at some point in the country. So I came on the scene. Like I said, my family was there at that time. They were consequential at that time. My Uncle John, who, if you've ever been to Cedar Lake, Indiana, where I'm from, you would know of Uncle John's Flea Market. That's my Uncle John. He owned some property at the time there. He thought he was going to run a farm and help feed the nearby city of Gary, which was, struggling from no longer being the epicenter of commerce that it once was. He had some high hopes of some humanitarian service there. It ended up going in a different direction for the property that he didn't intend, but you do what you have to survive. He would tell a story of standing in the church in front of Jack Hiles at one of the business meetings of the church. My Uncle John was probably the largest of the brothers, my uncles, which says a lot. And he, stood up in front of Jack Hiles and folded his arms as if to invite confrontation because it was the right thing to go help these kids. And that was something that he was very proud of. From that moment forward, because of the actions of my grandmother, all of my family was involved in that church, some of them deacons, some of them ushers, over the course of the next several decades. And the church grew and grew and grew. And when I got to be a certain age, when I was in college, I got an associate's degree in Massachusetts and came home regretting having spent so much of my parents' money to get that associate's degree. My mom would remain in debt to that degree for decades. Fortunately, they chose to pay my part of the debt off first. And so it wasn't until my parents got rid of their house in the last couple of years that the last of that debt was paid off. But anyway, it was a choice that they intentionally made on my behalf. My mom still feels like it was a good choice. I'm sure my dad also felt like it was a good choice. But anyway, I felt so guilty that I decided that I was going to go finish my bachelor's degree at a college at home. So that left two choices: either Purdue University Calumet or Hyles-Anderson College, which was the college that had come to be owned and operated by this church, my home church. And when I decided to enroll in Purdue because I figured I was going to want an advanced degree at some point, and Hyles-Anderson was not accredited. I started writing some legal pad about, my life and times, and I said, well, if there is something consequential about my life, if there was some reason why I exist, and there was some reason why I exist in the time and place that I exist, then it would probably have something to do with this church. Because in my life and times, in my family, in my community, in the decades in which I came onto the scene, to exist, this church really seems to be the most consequential thing in my sphere. So this must be part of it if there's a purpose here. So that's my backstory. As I got to be older, I started to see that there were some cracks in this. I still very strongly support my home church, but Jack Hyles was a very divisive man. I think he had a personality. He was somewhat egotistical. He fostered somewhat of a cult-like environment where you really had to buy in, like you really had to commit before you knew the whole story. He was not the type of man to abide, sitting on the sidelines. And as far as faith is concerned, I commend that. But as far as an individual is concerned, I would say, by all means, criticize and condemn me from now until forever. Never, ever trust a word that comes out of my mouth. Never, ever give me some kind of credence because of the way that I talk or the flesh that I inhibit. But do believe in something, and do be prepared to do anything for the things that you believe in. Complicated relationship, but sometimes he very much let the forcefulness behind which he felt you should place your confidence and ideology fall into confidence that you should place in an individual. I think he took advantage of that. I don't know if it happened all at once. I don't know if it was just something that happened occasionally as a result of just being in that kind of position over such a long period of time, or if it really genuinely was part of his personality and was always there. I don't know. You can make your own assumptions about the man. There's all kinds of video evidence out there about who he was and how he talked and what kind of a ministry he ran. There was also some complexity that I didn't know until later about his supposed relationship with a secretary as a married man and her being a married woman, and the impropriety there and the lengths that they went to cover that up. I am inclined to believe that those things are true just because of the nature of the conversation about them and how those things still persist. I've seen some videos. I've listened to some commentary. There were some news reports. The news covered this issue at some point. His daughter goes and professes some personal experience with this as part of her life as a personality. So I'm sure there's some credence to it. And in fact, the thing that leads me to really truly believe that there's credence to this is his son-in-law took over his position and turned out to be that and more. His son-in-law, Jack Scott, married his daughter, Cindy Hyles, and when he took over the church, some things remained the same, some things changed. I certainly started to have a different experience with my faith during that period of time. Part of it was his personality. Part of it was Jack Hyles passed away in early 2001, and in late 2001 there was the 9/11 terrorist attacks, and that fundamentally transformed the church because I think it gave a certain personality to a young man who was taking over a large ministry and at that point was unproven. It really gave him a platform. It gave him a personality. It gave him a way to differentiate himself from his father-in-law. It gave the new direction of the church a way to differentiate itself from the past. It was patriotic. It represented a marked change from the separation of church and state that I had grown up with to something of a Republican institution. My dad complained about it, decried it. I certainly experienced church differently from that point forward. And then it took me several years to come around to Scop as being, sort of a moral leader in the church. He certainly latched on to George W. Bush. He would talk about his time visiting George W. Bush. George W. Bush was, I think, a Baptist, if not some Southern Protestant denomination of Christian that was very welcoming of types like Jack Scop. So there was a kindred spirit there, and he very much latched onto that. Side note, it was around that time that I first saw an image that was very challenging to me. It was an image that somebody had painted, looked like an oil painting, but I'm sure it was done in Photoshop, of the military-industrial complex represented by, a red background, and in the foreground there was, fighter jets and tanks and armored vehicles and rockets and soldiers, and standing in the middle with a flag was George W. Bush wearing a suit with a tie, a flag pin, and cufflinks of crosses. And I thought, these people have no idea what being a Christian means. This is not Christianity. I don't know how anyone would dare associate this man or this war enterprise with Christianity. And it would be another 10 years probably before I revisited that and thought, okay, yeah, that was happening. That was a theme, and this is what this is. Wasn't the Christianity that I knew anyway. Bush was not. Scop was not. The new direction of the church was not. The response to the patriotic, pro-American, pro-war, anti-Muslim, anti-Middle East America was not what I knew of Christianity. I knew buses that ran into Chicago. That's what I knew of Christianity. And so anyway, sometime around 2012, Scop, about a little more than 10 years after he took office, he falls in some sort of situation with like a 16-year-old or some 16-year-old girl. He was texting her. He was physically involved with her. He was taking inappropriate pictures with her, taking advantage of this girl. There are many folks who would say, there's some complicated nuance to how a man in power and a young woman get involved. But nuance aside, the man took advantage of his position. The man took advantage of an impressionable woman, and the man abdicated his moral responsibility to himself, to that girl, to his wife, to his family, to her family, to his church, to the institution, to everything that he stood for. It doesn't matter how you want to dissect the relationship of two individuals, those things are all true. So anyway, that was a challenging moment for me. Obviously, I didn't go to church immediately following that. I did stay in touch with some of my my mentors in the ministry. One of which was my Sunday school teacher and close friend David Lutz, who I still make an attempt to reach out to. He was an incredible influence to me. At the time, I was going to Sunday school classes with him quite often, if not weekly. Really enjoyed his company, really enjoyed his guidance. Only today, I don't exactly know how it came up. I was thumbing around on YouTube and somehow came into like, an independent fundamental Baptist in the Capitol building. I was like, oh, okay, well, I'm not surprised. Clicked on something, clicked on something, clicked on something, clicked on something. Jack Scop. Oh, yeah. All these letters that went to the judge to say, but he's actually a good man. And one of them was from my mentor and friend, close friend, Dave Lutz, saying, I always felt that he exhibited the highest moral character, and despite this offense. I still feel that. I don't accept, I don't condone the institution of not just my home church, but the denomination, the movement, the period of time in which people profess faith in Christ and gather together in the house of God. Those people, that institution, this practice repeatedly is either engaging in moral depravity or is fooled by an accomplice and complicit with moral depravity when it exists in the world in the form of a secular leader. I now live in Maryland, and after coming out here, my wife and I found a local church, and the local church here, the folks there understood. They knew of this enormous consequential church that I came from. And again, that enormous consequential church, if I go back now and I tell people my name is Don Lael, they know my last name, and their first question will be, Lael, whose boy are you? Like, okay, there are some Laels. There's a handful of Laels, and we all know them. And you must be the child of one, because that's about how old you are. So, like I'm known in the community, and it's a known community. So talking with some folks in this church, they respect the ministry there. They, of course, everybody's always aware of Hyles's personality and his ministry, and despite the fact that they all feel that he did good work reaching people, he had a challenging personality that was very divisive outside of his own ministry. Inside of his own ministry, it served to bind people together and really align them to the church against everything else. But outside the church, he was divisive. You either were with him or you were against him. There wasn't really middle ground. So these folks were welcoming. They knew about me. They knew about Hyles Anderson. Some of the folks had been to Hyles Anderson. They were all very welcoming. And it wasn't long before, what did we get out here? 2015? So it wasn't long after that that the birther movement turned into the Trump for president movement. And gosh, if some people in the church didn't, make themselves known as being emphatically part of that movement very early on. And this was challenging to me because this was a much smaller church community, and therefore I actually, as a man in the ministry there, felt like it's my responsibility to help shape this. If we're representing the faith inwardly to our community, and some men in the church feel the privilege or the responsibility to make that into a political position, and so it became my responsibility to make sure that that was met with opposition. Because if we're going to be an institution focused on helping people, if we're going to be an institution focused on our business of a church as opposed to the business, as opposed to business of the dollar or business of the nation, then we need to take that into consideration. We need to make sure, be very straightforward about what it is that we're here to do. Naturally, I was in the minority, and my confrontation was often met with rebuff. So an additional confrontation. If I were to voice my opinion on something, then several people would come voice their opinions to me at a later time personally. And there were times when some folks felt like this was an opportunity to scrutinize my behavior or my interests, and seek opportunities to try to counsel me on those things as a way of letting me know that I wasn't ready to participate in a political conversation in the church. So That grew and grew to the point where, at some point in there, we had Lainey. So Lainey was born August 13th, 2018. We dedicated her there at the church, meaning, so it's modeled after Samuel in the Bible. His mother says, if I'm able to have a baby, I will devote this baby to the Lord. Again, back to my dad regretting later in life throwing that name away because he felt like that was actually quite a gift that his dad gave him, or that his parents gave him. So we went through that process, and then it wasn't long after that I would take Lainey as part of our father-daughter dates to Wednesday night church, and sometimes she would sleep and sometimes she wouldn't. Sometimes she would cry the whole time. More often than not, I had to spend the majority of the service outside walking her in the hallway so that she would stop crying, or because she was crying. I would feed her there. I would let her play with toys. It became our thing, and it became such a thing that even now when she sees church on the phone, when I pull it up live, she recognizes it and she longs for it. It was a positive experience for her. And we would go pray at the altar, and she made a habit of doing that herself. I personally I felt very good about that. That is exactly all of the good things that my faith means to me. She was getting, and she was getting in spades, and she was getting early. And it served as an opportunity for Caitlin to relax once a week, not have to worry about the baby being connected to her all the time. Caitlin would stay home, she would clean up the house, she would read, she would take a bath, whatever she wanted to do. It was her day off, and that was great. So it's checked all the boxes. It wasn't until a long time later when I started to express, on Sundays, it's just not comfortable to go anymore. It's so coded. The language is so coded. The community is so coded red, so coded toward Trump in a time when Trump was getting more and more, I hate to use a meme word, but deplorable. It just, as a human being, he just became continually more himself, just a bag of rotten pus, like garbage flowing out of an anus. He was just, and yet, these moral, kind, calm, loving, caring, godly folks, their voices are like, maple syrup, molasses. Just had nothing bad to say about the man. And I did my best to try to really ramp up my own evaluation of my ideologies at the time. I was like, all right, sure, let's do this. Let's clean house, right? If I want you to play with me, I'm going to play with you. So I started spitballing, dissecting my own beliefs about the world to see maybe I'm the one in the wrong here. Maybe I don't know what God wants. And so I would make Facebook statuses where, I would invite people to challenge my thinking on things. And I found out that there are people that hold stronger beliefs than me on a great many things, in both directions. But the purpose of, prostrating myself before the community and trying to find common ground as believers didn't take. Instead, they just, moved further on without me, and it became more and more uncomfortable to go and try to, put on a smile to participate. And then COVID hit. Right before COVID hit, I mentioned this to Caitlin, and she said, this isn't why I don't go. And I was like, oh, I thought you didn't go because you were enjoying your break or something. And she's like, no, people make me uncomfortable. Okay, fair. If you're not comfortable there, I'm not comfortable there, then I don't feel comfortable bringing our daughter there. It's just not comfortable anymore. And so then COVID hit, and then for all of 2020, for the entirety of 2020, I did not show my face at physical church, which is an extreme outlier for me personally. And then as articles continue to come out about Trump's base, even his violent base, even the people who are saying like we're going to end democracy, we're going to take back the country. We're Christians, we're evangelicals, we're Protestants, we're Baptists, we're independents, fundamentals. And I couldn't, like at the time, it was like, yeah, of course they are. Of course they are. Every time an article said that, of course they are. Of course they are. I know that. I knew that. These people are finding these things out for the first time, but I knew that. I know that. And then leading up to the Capitol riot, where men invaded the Capitol building, were enabled by the actual federal security of the building, and encouraged by our president, the leadership in our country. We're there to kidnap or abuse or murder our elected officials and end the institution of American democracy. And then I see, some of these men are Baptists, some of these men are independents, fundamentals, ministry leaders, pastors, assistant pastors, Sunday school teachers, devout Christian men. And my thought is only ever, of course they are. Of course they are. Of course they are. And that, in a nutshell, is the story of why I want nothing ever again to do with such a community. That does not represent my beliefs. It does not represent my behavior. It does not represent my concept of moral responsibility. It does not represent my understanding of defying the platitudes of the people who are comfortable in their seats, and instead turning to the poor, broken, disenfranchised, and serving them instead. Now, what serving them means, this is another theme that has been complicated in my life. Being in I guess you could say evangelical, I guess this is the meaning of evangelical, being in an evangelical church where the greatest good that you can do for someone is to witness to them. The greatest good that you can do to anyone is to put them in heaven forever. If you feed them, fine, they'll live a little longer. If you clothe them, great, they'll be a little warmer. If you put them in a house, sure, they'll be a little more stable. But we all die, and we all end up somewhere. So as a Christian, if you truly believe in your faith, then the greatest importance, the greatest thing that you can ever do to somebody is witness to them, and get them saved, find them a way into heaven, give them a relationship with Christ. And so that's the basis on which this ministry of going into the ghettos in Chicago and filling up buses with children who don't have any other means to go to church, to come to church and get saved, go to church and have a relationship with God, so that even when their miserable lives end, they can live eternity in heaven. That's the priority as compared to improving their material circumstances, ending the institutions that put them into the problematic situations that they are in, changing the landscape around them so that they can have better lives, making it so that their children enjoy life better than they did, making sure that society is moving in the right direction, help these people not fall through the cracks. Yeah, but, eternity. So there's that to think about. And where you land on that concept is entirely based on what your belief system is. Now, I tend to believe that the example of Christ compels us to do both. If you are concerned about somebody's eternity, you should be, and you should provide them with that. But also, we owe goodness and kindness to one another. If there's anything that we would want someone to do for us, we should be prepared to do it for them. And things like race and religion and national border, ethnicity, identity, origin are immaterial to the discussion. In fact, when you do things for someone who's within your own gated community, when you do things for someone, and it's part of the reciprocal social structures that exist that you share, then it's dead weight. It's not meaningful. It's only when you do something for someone that that could never in any way positively influence your material conditions that that it means anything. And the best example of that is the Good Samaritan. You know, who is the good person? Is it the in modern vernacular? If there's somebody struggling, are the good people passing by on their way to do church business with holding their Bibles and wearing their suits? Are they the good people, or is it the you know, who do we vilify now, right? Is it the Muslim? Is it the Muslim who bends down and helps that man who's hurting, that is righteous? It's the Muslim. It's the Muslim who bends down and helps the man that is righteous. The Christian walking by on their way to perform righteousness, ignoring the poor person hurting, is the unrighteous in that scenario. So that's my understanding of it. However, it's complicated, right? Because my understanding of what it means to be Christian, and I did my best to explain where that comes from, flies in the face of the modern Christian experience, I guess, what the majority of people who look like me and believe like me act, do, and say about their faith. Given that disparity, I have a couple of options. I can maintain my faith and ignore the rest of people that share it. I don't think that that's fine. I can maintain my faith and go in and flip the tables and whip people out of the churches and say, not in my house. Like, this is not I'm going to continue to believe in God. I'm going to continue to practice Christianity. I'm going to continue to be a part of my local church. I'm going to continue to do right for the poor and needy in my community. And I'm going to do it here as the Bible commanded me, and therefore you all have to leave. And violently, you know, debase the environment that I'm in. Or I can say, you know what, if this is where you all have gotten as a result of your faith, then it has no value. Then your faith has no value. If this is where you've come to, then you know, then your map is not worth the paper it's printed on. And I don't know what the right answer is. The only thing that I can't do is just continue to be a part of it and say, you know, Christians will be Christians. Anyway, that was a very complicated, weighty perspective that hopefully it's not gonna, you know, oh, wouldn't it be great if this is what I somehow came to be known for? Good God. What's wrong with my hair? What am I doing? This is like, by the way, this is what happens when you stop caring about absolutely everything and you just wander around in a half-caffeinated daze in your house for an entire year, rarely ever getting out of your pajamas. So yeah, there's the thoughts for the day. Happy journaling, everybody. I'm going to be doing my best to continue to solve this thought, because it is imperative that I solve this thought before. This is the foundation on which everything else has to be built. So, and I'm not going to solve it overnight. I'm not going to figure this out at the end of my current book. I'm not going to figure this out at the end of my next book. I'm not going to figure this out before the next baby gets here in April. This will be something that I have to work out continually on my own. Work out your salvation with fear and trembling, the Bible says. So what's next? You know, on top of all that, there's do we share this planet? Do we share this country with people who don't believe like us? Absolutely. Do we allow the behaviors of those who have been successful, just as we allow the behaviors in the same manner that we allow the behaviors of those who are unsuccessful? Absolutely. Do we do our best to improve the material circumstances of ourselves and those around us? Absolutely. Do we try to make a better life and a better society for generations coming? Absolutely. All of these, quote unquote, less consequential material things that are not tied, not in and of themselves the ultimate thought of existence, but all tied to the importance of the time that we can serve here on Earth. You know, it feels wrong to try to figure out the details before figuring out the big picture. But like I said, it's not all going to come together overnight. This stuff has to be, sometimes you just have to move forward. Sometimes you just have to do the best with what you've got. Sometimes you don't have a solid worldview that's unassailable, but you still have the responsibility to care for the people in your life and do your best for the coming generations and for your society and for your community. You are not abdicated of your responsibilities just because you don't have a full vision of what it is that you're doing. You have to build a car while you're driving. Or sorry, you have to drive the car while you're building it, I guess I should say. Okay, that's all I've got for tonight. Someday I will have answers. That's what I told my best friend when I was about 14 years old. He was asking me something about, what my beliefs are, and I said, my beliefs work for me. But I don't have the answers. When I do, I'll let you know. And I'm still saying the same thing. When I do, I'll let you know. And maybe that is the answer. When I do, I'll let you know. What I do know, I will let you know. Okay, good night, everybody. Sorry for taking up 46 and a half minutes of your time. Again, I didn't have the time and energy for this today, but it's been good. See ya.